Hello, I'm Jacob Berger, and welcome to the video abstract for my paper, Mental States Conscious and Non-Conscious, recently published in Philosophy Compass. Now, it's just obvious that we're often in conscious mental states. Right now, presumably you consciously see my face, consciously hear my voice, and are consciously having thoughts about what I'm saying. But there are a lot of good reasons to think that mental states such as perceptual states and thoughts can occur without being conscious too. This idea isn't new. Practically everyone's familiar with Freud's theory that we often have problematic thoughts or desires that are pushed out of consciousness and into the recesses of our minds. But apart from Freud's theory, there's increasing evidence from both philosophy and experimental disciplines such as psychology and cognitive neuroscience that suggests that mental states can and often do occur without being conscious. But what is the nature of these non-conscious mental states, and what, if anything, is the difference between them and their conscious counterparts? These are the kinds of questions that I'm exploring in this paper. Of course, not everyone in philosophy has agreed that mental states can be non-conscious. Descartes, for example, famously seems to have held that conscious states are states that we're suitably aware of, and that we're always suitably aware of our mental states. On this kind of a view, all mental states are conscious, and if there are any states of us that are not conscious, then they're no more mental than, say, states of our livers or states of our retina. But the view that mental states are invariably conscious is in the minority these days. In any case, though most grant that mental states can occur without being conscious, there's much debate about the nature of non-conscious states and what restrictions, if any, there are on what kinds of states can occur outside of consciousness. Getting straight about these issues is important, I think, because they have ramifications for questions about the nature of consciousness itself and the mind generally. So in the paper, I begin by discussing a range of common sense and experimental reasons to think that mental states can occur non-consciously. For example, I discussed the striking phenomenon known as blind sight, which results from a certain kind of brain damage to the visual cortex. If, for example, experimenters present persons with blind sight with two visual stimuli, then the participants typically respond that they're unable to see them. But if they're pressed to render a judgment, they're above chance of distinguishing them. And this suggests that participants did not consciously see the stimuli, though they did subliminally perceive them, which enabled them to distinguish them. I then explore some reasons why philosophers have denied or might deny that such states really are non-conscious mental states. So for example, one might think that states that aren't conscious aren't accurately described as mental, but rather, to use Dennett's helpful expression, subpersonal. That is, states attributable only to persons' subsystems and not to the people themselves. I then offer some reasons to question these attempts to dismiss non-conscious mental states. But even if one grants that some kinds of mental states can be non-conscious, one might deny that all kinds of mental states can be. So for example, many have urged that sensory states like pains are invariably conscious. What, after all, is there to a pain if not its conscious feeling? But in reply, I offer some common sense reasons to think that even sensory states such as pains can be non-conscious. Indeed, I note that there's burgeoning experimental evidence suggesting that a wide range of mental states and mental processes that one might have otherwise thought must be conscious can occur without being conscious, such as certain kinds of perceptual illusions, emotional states, social cognition, and even intentional action. The foregoing discussion points to a hypothesis that I call the non-conscious state thesis, which holds that for any kind of mental state that can occur consciously, it can occur non-consciously. Now, the status of this thesis, of course, depends on how we understand the nature of consciousness itself, so I then turn to discussing a range of philosophical and scientific theories of consciousness to explore what, if any, restrictions they may place on the nature of non-conscious mental states. Of course, if we were to find powerful experimental evidence suggesting that certain kinds of states that particular theories of consciousness hold must be conscious, can occur without being conscious, then this would put significant pressure on those views. And I conclude that the status of the non-conscious state thesis remains open, and that theorists of consciousness would do well to pay close attention to the growing empirical literature on the nature and roles of non-conscious mental states. I close the article with a brief discussion of the question of what makes a state mental. Those like Descartes who deny that mental states can be non-conscious arguably have a straightforward explanation of the mark of the mental, namely a state is mental if and only if it's conscious. But if mental states can be non-conscious, as I've argued, then this account simply will not do. So I explore some possible other markers of mentality, raising difficulties for each proposal. However this debate may be resolved, what seems quite clear is that mental states, however they're understood, can be non-conscious, and that a better understanding of them will have implications for our studies of consciousness and the mind generally.